Sydney Iceberg prank. In the early hours of an April morning, residents along Sydney Harbor were alerted to something that should not have existed in those waters. Floating just offshore was what appeared to be a massive iceberg, white, jagged, and unmistakably polar in appearance. The explanation, already circulating through radio broadcasts and newspaper offices, was as audacious as the sight itself. A well-known Australian businessman and adventurer, Dick Smith, claimed he had successfully towed a full-scale iceberg from Antarctica to Sydney. According to his announcement, the frozen mass would soon be cut into pieces and sold to the public as authentic Antarctic ice. The claim arrived pre-packaged with confidence. Smith was not an obscure prankster. He was a millionaire entrepreneur, a public figure with a reputation for bold stunts, aviation feats, and media-friendly escapades. His plans sounded logistically absurd, but not impossible enough to dismiss outright. Antarctic icebergs do break free. Ocean currents do travel north. And Smith had already contacted hundreds of media outlets in advance, arranging for callers to vouch for the sighting and amplify anticipation. By the time the iceberg was visible from the harbor, the story had momentum. Crowds gathered. Cameras rolled. The idea of purchasing ancient polar ice for 10 cents apiece was repeated across broadcasts with only cautious skepticism. The structure appeared solid. From a distance, it reflected light like real ice. Up close, it still resisted easy explanation. No immediate authority stepped forward to deny the claim, and no regulation existed for importing an iceberg because no one had ever tried. The illusion, however, was built on fragile materials. The iceberg was, in reality, a standard barge concealed beneath plastic sheeting and layered with shaving cream and firefighting foam to mimic ice. It was never meant to endure close inspection for long. Smith had accounted for curiosity, disbelief, and media scrutiny. What he had not accounted for was the weather. Rain began to fall. Water pooled and soaked into the foam. The surface sagged, then slumped. Sections collapsed, revealing plastic beneath the white facade. The iceberg did not melt slowly. It failed structurally. Within hours, the illusion unraveled in full view of the harbor. Smith immediately acknowledged the prank. He later estimated the total cost at just over $1,400, a figure that only heightened public reaction. The stunt had fooled thousands, dominated headlines, and briefly suspended disbelief across an entire city. No laws were broken. No one was harmed. But the event became a case study in how authority, preparation, and spectacle can override common sense. The Sydney Iceberg was not a scientific hoax or a forged artifact. It was something simpler and more revealing. It demonstrated how easily perception bends when a story arrives fully formed, confidently delivered, in time to exploit trust. For a few hours in 1978, an impossible object floated in plain sight, and almost everyone believed it. Alabama Pie Hoax. In the spring of 1998, an unusual piece of legislative news began circulating through email lists, early internet forums, and science discussion groups. According to a report published in the newsletter of New Mexicans for Science and Reason, the Alabama state legislature had allegedly voted to redefine the mathematical constant pi. The new value, the article claimed, would no longer be 3.14159, but a more biblical and politically acceptable number, exactly 3.0. The justification, as presented, was that the traditional value conflicted with religious interpretations and therefore required correction by law. The reaction was immediate and intense. Readers expressed disbelief that a legislature could attempt to rewrite one of the most fundamental constants in mathematics. Scientists and educators voiced outrage. Commentators outside the United States cited the story as evidence of political hostility towards science education. Some media outlets repeated the claim without verification, while others framed it as an alarming cultural anecdote. For many, the story felt absurd, but not impossible. The article named specific details that gave it credibility. It attributed the fictional bill to a legislator identified as Leonard Lee Lawson and claimed it was supported by a religious organization called the Solomon Society. It described the vote as decisive and the rationale as rooted in moral clarity rather than mathematical accuracy. The tone was restrained, written like a dry policy update rather than a joke. Nowhere did it signal that it was parody. In reality, the entire story was fabricated. It was written by physicist Mark Boslow of Los Alamos National Laboratory as a deliberate April Fool's satire. The goal was not to mock religion, but to criticize political interference in science education by pushing the idea to an obviously illogical extreme. The publication date, April 1st, was the only overt clue. Even after the hoax was exposed, confusion persisted. Alabama lawmakers reportedly received phone calls and messages from citizens demanding the decision be overturned. Clarifications circulated, but the story had already escaped its original context. The outrage had taken on a life of its own. What made the hoax especially convincing was its historical precedent. In 1897, the Indiana legislature had genuinely debated House Bill No. 246, a proposal that would have effectively redefined pi as 3.2. The bill passed unanimously in the Indiana House before being halted in the Senate, where a mathematics professor happened to be present and explained its implications. That real event demonstrated that legislative misunderstanding of mathematics was not hypothetical. The Alabama pi hoax succeeded because it rested on something uncomfortably true. Science has been misunderstood before. Authority has attempted to legislate facts before, and for a brief moment in 1998, many people believed it had happened again. Washing of the lions. For centuries, Londoners were periodically invited to witness a ceremony that sounded ancient, regal, and entirely plausible to its time. The event was known as the Washing of the Lions, a supposed ritual in which the lions of the Tower of London would be formally cleaned in a public spectacle. The invitations framed it as a tradition rooted in royal custom, one that most citizens had simply never happened to see. That absence only made the promise more enticing. The earliest known references to the prank date back to the late 17th century. By 1698, printed notices were already circulating that encouraged members of the public to attend the washing on a specific day, usually April 1st. The Tower of London, which at the time still housed exotic animals in its menagerie, gave the story a foundation of truth. Lions really had been kept there for centuries. The idea that they might occasionally be washed by royal attendants did not immediately trigger disbelief. What made the hoax effective was its tone of authority. The invitations were written in formal language and often sealed to appear official. They warned recipients to arrive on time and, in some versions, explicitly instructed them not to offer tips or gratuities to guards. That detail, small but specific, suggested authenticity. Scams tend to ask for money. This one did the opposite. The most famous instance occurred in 1856, when invitations were widely distributed under the name of a supposed senior tower official called Herbert de Grassen. The letter was sealed with crimson wax and presented itself as a private summons rather than a public advertisement. Those who attended reportedly arrived expecting a grand ceremony involving uniforms, royal oversight, and perhaps even members of the aristocracy. Instead, they found nothing. No lions, no attendants, no event of any kind. Contemporary accounts describe confusion followed by embarrassment as attendees slowly realized they had been fooled. There was no public announcement revealing the prank. No explanation was offered. The silence itself was part of the joke. Those who had fallen for it simply went home, while those who knew of the hoax quietly enjoyed its success. The prank endured for generations because it exploited repetition. Each new invitation implied that previous ceremonies must have occurred, even if the recipient had never personally witnessed one. The tower's long history, combined with the public's limited access to its inner workings, made verification difficult. The absence of mass media allowed the joke to reset every few years. The washing of the lions never happened. There was no ritual, no tradition, and no ceremony. Yet for more than a century, people continued to believe it might. The hoax survived not because it was elaborate, but because it felt like the kind of odd, ceremonial thing history often hides in plain sight. Piltdown Man hoax. In the early 20th century, fragments pulled from a gravel pit in southern England promised to rewrite the story of human evolution. Between 1911 and 1912, amateur archaeologist Charles Dawson presented a collection of fossilized remains that appeared extraordinary. Pieces of a human-like skull, a jawbone, and several worn teeth. The discovery was announced to the scientific world as Piltdown Man, a transitional form that seemed to bridge the gap between apes and modern humans. More importantly for British science, it appeared to be the earliest human ancestor ever found on English soil. At the time, the find was embraced with remarkable enthusiasm. The skull fragments suggested a large brain, while the jaw appeared primitive and ape-like. This combination aligned neatly with prevailing assumptions that human intelligence had evolved early, before other physical traits. Leading scientists examined the fossils and accepted them as genuine. Museums displayed reconstructions. Textbooks incorporated Piltdown Man into evolutionary timelines. For decades, it stood as a cornerstone of paleoanthropology. Yet there were problems from the start. The fossils did not quite resemble similar finds emerging elsewhere in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Piltdown Man seemed anatomically out of place. Still, skepticism was muted. The authority of the institutions involved, combined with national pride and limited testing methods, allowed doubts to be sidelined. The unraveling began slowly and ended decisively in 1953. Scientists at the Natural History Museum in London applied new analytical techniques to the fossils, including fluorine dating and microscopic examination. The results were devastating. The jawbone was not human at all. It belonged to an orangutan. The teeth had been deliberately filed down to mimic human wear patterns. Chemical staining had been used to give the bones an artificial appearance of age. The skull fragments, while human, were far more recent than claimed. Piltdown Man was exposed as a deliberate fabrication. The revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Reputations were damaged. Careers were questioned. More troubling was the realization that the hoax had distorted research for decades, drawing attention away from legitimate discoveries that did not fit the Piltdown model. Entire theories had been shaped around a false foundation. In 2016, a comprehensive study using modern forensic techniques settled a long-running debate. The evidence confirmed that Charles Dawson himself was the architect of the hoax. The same methods and materials were found across multiple forged specimens linked to him. The Piltdown Man hoax did not succeed because of clever fabrication alone. It succeeded because it told scientists what they were prepared to believe. For 40 years, a fake ancestor occupied humanity's family tree, and almost no one questioned whether it belonged there. Jovian, Plutonian effect. On the morning of April 1, 1976, radio listeners across the United Kingdom were treated to an announcement that seemed to promise a brief encounter with the impossible. Patrick Moore, a respected British astronomer, science writer, and television personality, addressed his audience on BBC Radio 2 with a claim that would capture the imagination and suspend disbelief for a few unforgettable minutes. According to Moore, a rare astronomical alignment between Jupiter and Pluto was imminent, a configuration that, he explained, would momentarily reduce the force of gravity on Earth. If listeners jumped at precisely the right moment, they might feel themselves lift, however slightly, off the ground. The broadcast was delivered with Moore's characteristic authority. His calm tone, measured cadence, and unquestioned credibility lent the story an air of plausibility. He spoke not as a trickster, but as an expert communicating the wonders of the universe. The instructions were simple yet precise. Wait for the alignment, jump, and notice a fleeting sensation of weightlessness. To anyone familiar with Moore's work, the announcement sounded scientifically grounded, at least on the surface. Within minutes, phones began ringing across the BBC studios. Listeners called in reporting the experience of a strange floating sensation. Some described feeling lighter in one step, while others claimed a brief sense of suspension as they leaped. The reports multiplied, creating a feedback loop that seemed to confirm the improbable event. The prank, though entirely fictional, had worked. Ordinary people, guided by trust in expertise and the thrill of cosmic possibility, had momentarily believed in the impossible. In reality, the alignment was impossible. Jupiter and Pluto were on opposite sides of the sky, separated by millions of kilometers. The gravitational influence of even the largest planets is negligible on everyday life, and there is no celestial configuration that could reduce Earth's gravity in any perceptible way. The Jovian-Plutonian effect existed only in imagination, broadcast live by a figure whose authority made fiction feel like fact. The legend of the prank persisted far beyond that April morning. Decades later, it continues to circulate online and in anecdotes, inspiring new listeners to momentarily wonder whether the Earth might, at some precise instant, permit flight. Moore himself never confirmed that anyone truly experienced levitation, though the calls to the studio remained part of the story. The Jovian-Plutonian prank endures as an example of how authority, preparation, and timing can make the impossible believable. It demonstrates that even the most outlandish claims can captivate the public when delivered by someone trusted, spoken with precision, and timed to exploit curiosity. For a few brief moments in 1976, people believed that gravity could be bent, and for many, it felt real. Berners Street Hoax. On a chilly morning in late November 1809, one quiet street in London became the epicenter of a citywide spectacle unlike any other. Theodore Hook, a dramatist and notorious prankster of early 19th century England, had conceived a plan that would test the limits of organization, gullibility, and urban chaos. The target was 54 Berners Street, a modest residence belonging to an unsuspecting Mrs. Tottenham. By dawn, Hook's meticulous scheme would transform the street into a scene of absurd, unstoppable pandemonium. Hook's strategy was both simple and ingenious. He sent approximately 4,000 letters to tradespeople, professionals, and notable figures across London, each claiming to be a personal request from the resident of Berners Street. The letters were tailored to their recipients. Bakers were invited to deliver cakes. Chimney sweeps were summoned to clean the chimneys. Doctors were urgently needed, coal merchants were called to supply fuel, and so on. Even dignitaries were caught in the web. Among the arrivals was the Duke of Gloucester, convinced by the letter that his immediate presence was required. Every message, though false, carried enough plausibility to provoke a genuine response. The effect on Berners Street was immediate. By 5 in the morning, chaos had begun. Coal carts blocked the narrow lanes. Chimney sweeps clambered over rooftops, and bakers wheeled in baskets brimming with bread and pastries. Doctors and undertakers arrived in confusion, while musicians, tradesmen, and deliverymen crowded the pavements, each believing they were fulfilling a legitimate request. Noise, commotion, and general disorder spread quickly, leaving the streets resident powerless against the onslaught. Even civic authorities were unwittingly drawn in. The mayor of London, believing he had received a personal summons, appeared at the scene, adding prestige to the growing spectacle. By mid-morning, the street was impassable. Carriages could not pass. Pedestrians navigated a labyrinth of deliveries, and Mrs. Tottenham, completely unaware of the prank, watched helplessly as her home became the center of an orchestrated maelstrom. Hook's ingenuity lay not only in the scale of the hoax, but also in its precision. Each letter was carefully timed and addressed, ensuring a continuous stream of arrivals. From dawn until the chaos naturally subsided, Berners Street remained under siege, a testament to the power of coordination and deception executed with subtle humor. The Berners Street hoax remains legendary because it combines scale, audacity, and clever manipulation of social trust. No animals, no machines, and no supernatural forces were involved. Just letters, human credulity, and the meticulous planning of a man determined to prove how easily society could be duped. For hours that November morning, London watched in disbelief as a single street became the stage for one of history's most elaborate pranks. Sans serif Republic. In 1977, readers of The Guardian were introduced to a destination that seemed exotic, remote, and utterly captivating. The the Republic of Sans Serif. According to the newspaper, this tiny island nation in the Indian Ocean was shaped like a semicolon, a curious geographical feature that immediately set it apart from ordinary countries. The 7-page travel supplement that accompanied the article painted a rich, detailed picture of Sans Serif, describing its culture, geography, and government with the tone of a legitimate guide. For anyone skimming the pages, it appeared perfectly plausible, a hidden gem waiting to be explored. Closer inspection, however, revealed the extraordinary nature of the prank. Every detail was a clever pun drawn from the world of printing and typography. The nation's name itself, Sans Serif, was a play on the typographical term sans serif. The capital city was called Bodoni, after the famous typeface. The island's inhabitants were the Flong people, a nod to a sheet of type used in printing presses, while the country's dictator was identified as General M. J. Pica, referencing a common unit of typographic measurement. Streets, landmarks, and local customs were similarly named with typographical wordplay, creating an entire fictional world that functioned like an inside joke for those in the printing trade. The hoax's brilliance lay not only in its creativity, but also in its presentation. The Guardian printed the feature in the style of a professional travel supplement, complete with photographs, maps, and advertisements. Many readers did not immediately realize they were being duped. The realism of the layout, combined with the authoritative tone of the prose, encouraged belief. Advertisers even joined in, reinforcing the illusion. Kodak, for example, reportedly ran a contest inviting readers to submit photographs of Sans Serif, blurring the line between fiction and reality even further. Sans Serif quickly became a phenomenon. The story captivated the public and inspired countless conversations and letters to the newspaper. For some, it was a whimsical discovery. For others, it was a shocking revelation when the truth became clear. The Guardian continued to reference Sans Serif in later April Fool's editions, cementing its status as a recurring satirical feature. Over time, the fictional republic took on a life of its own, with digital references, online maps, and even a dedicated wiki travel page, ensuring that the line between parody and reality remained playfully ambiguous. The Republic of Sans Serif endures as one of the most sophisticated and enduring media pranks in history. It demonstrated how authority, presentation, and attention to detail could make an entirely fictional world feel real. For a brief moment, the public believed they could visit an island shaped like a semicolon, only to realize they had been invited into a cleverly constructed typographic joke. Mount Edgecombe prank. On the morning of April 1st, 1974, residents of Sitka, Alaska, awoke to a sight that sent immediate concern through the small coastal community. From the slopes of Mount Edgecombe, a dormant volcano that had long loomed over the town, plumes of dark smoke were rising. Panic spread quickly. Locals feared that the mountain, silent for centuries, had suddenly awakened, threatening lives and property. Calls were made to authorities, and a U.S. Coast Guard helicopter was dispatched to assess the situation. As the aircraft approached the summit, the pilot expected to find molten rock, steam vents, or other signs of volcanic activity. Instead, what appeared from above was a carefully orchestrated illusion. Lying in the crater was a massive arrangement of burning tires, meticulously positioned to spell out a single message in letters nearly 50 feet high. April Fool. The smoke that had alarmed the town was not volcanic ash or steam, but black clouds from scorched rubber. What had seemed a sudden natural disaster was revealed to be a prank of extraordinary scale. The mastermind behind the stunt was a local resident named Oliver Porky Bicker. Over the course of 3 years, Bicker had quietly collected 70 tires, all intended for a single April Fool's display. He recruited friends and enlisted the help of a helicopter pilot to position the tires precisely within the crater. Timing, planning, and secrecy were critical. Any misstep could have spoiled the effect or even endangered participants. By the morning of April 1st, every detail was in place, waiting for the unsuspecting residents to witness the illusion. The prank succeeded spectacularly. Once the truth became known, the story quickly spread beyond Alaska. Reporters from the Associated Press captured the image of the crater with its burning letters, and the stunt received international attention. For many, the scale and ingenuity of the prank were almost unbelievable. No lives were harmed, and the mountain remained dormant. Yet the incident cemented itself in popular memory as one of the most audacious April Fool's pranks in history. Beyond the immediate shock and amusement, the Mount Edgecombe prank stands as a testament to the power of perception and context. The combination of a dormant volcano, visible smoke, and carefully staged preparation created a scenario that nearly everyone interpreted as real danger. For a brief moment, the town of Sitka believed the mountain had come alive. When the truth was revealed, the relief was accompanied by awe at the creativity and dedication of one prankster and his collaborators. Even decades later, the image of the crater spelling out April Fool remains iconic, a reminder of how imagination and audacity can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Great Moon Hoax. On August 25, 1835, readers of the New York Sun were confronted with a story that seemed to transport them far beyond the familiar streets of Manhattan. According to the article, astronomers had made an astonishing discovery: life on the moon. The story claimed to be based on research published in the Edinburgh Journal of Science, lending the account an air of academic credibility. From the very first lines, the reader was drawn into a vision of a lunar world teeming with strange creatures and unimaginable landscapes. The creatures described were nothing short of fantastical. Among them were unicorn-like animals prancing across the lunar plains, two-legged beavers engaged in industrious labor, and humanoid beings with wings reminiscent of bats. Rivers supposedly flowed through valleys lined with towering amethyst crystals, creating a spectacle that combined wonder with scientific plausibility. Every detail was carefully presented to suggest observation rather than imagination. The article made no overt claims of fiction, leaving readers to assume that the moon itself had revealed these marvels under careful telescopic scrutiny. This installment was just the first in a six-part series, each adding layers of observation, speculation, and increasingly elaborate descriptions of lunar life. The series was the work of Richard Adams Locke, a reporter for The Sun who intended the story as a satirical commentary on the excesses of speculative astronomy. Locke's goal was to parody the overconfidence of astronomers and the gullibility of the public who readily accepted unverified claims. Despite its satirical roots, the story achieved a life of its own. The public's imagination was captured in full, and the newspaper's circulation soared. Letters poured in from readers expressing amazement, curiosity, and disbelief, while others debated the authenticity of the discoveries. The hoax demonstrated a remarkable interplay between authority, presentation, and the public's appetite for wonder. Locke's fictional lunar inhabitants were widely accepted as real, and for weeks, the citizens of New York discussed moon beasts as if they were neighbors rather than products of an overactive pen. The Great Moon Hoax also drew inspiration from earlier works of speculative fiction, including writings by Edgar Allan Poe, which explored the possibility of life beyond Earth. By blending scientific terminology with imaginative narrative, Locke blurred the line between observation and invention, creating a story that felt real enough to fool thousands. Over time, the truth emerged, but the impact of the hoax endured, cementing its place as one of the most successful and influential media deceptions in history. For a brief, remarkable moment, humanity looked to the moon and believed it inhabited a world of marvels, entirely imagined, yet vividly real to all who read The Sun that August. Spaghetti Harvest. On April 1, 1957, viewers tuning in to the BBC's long-running investigative program Panorama were presented with a story that seemed both charming and utterly improbable. The segment focused on Swiss farmers engaged in the harvest of what appeared to be strands of spaghetti growing from trees. The report was delivered with the same meticulous attention to detail and sober tone that characterized serious investigative journalism. Cameraman Charles de Jager, the originator of the idea, had orchestrated the segment to test how much the public trusted what they saw on television. The footage showed farmers carefully plucking long, pale noodles from tree branches, laying them in baskets, and bundling them for market. The narration described traditional methods of cultivation, weather conditions affecting yield, and the careful drying process, all presented as routine and entirely credible. The story was framed as if it were an ordinary agricultural practice, devoid of humor or exaggeration, inviting viewers to accept what they saw as reality. The professionalism of the presentation was key. It exploited the public's natural trust in broadcast media and their assumptions about exotic European farming traditions. Reactions were immediate and revealing. Many viewers contacted the BBC to inquire about planting their own spaghetti trees, asking for cultivation tips and regional climate advice. Others called simply to verify whether the story was factual. Letters of astonishment and curiosity flooded the network, demonstrating just how effective a well-executed prank could be when framed with authority. Despite the clear absurdity, spaghetti does not, and cannot, grow on trees. The delivery and context made the claim believable to a surprising number of people. Not all responses were amused. Some viewers complained that the program had misled the public, taking issue with the deceptive presentation and questioning the ethics of broadcasting fiction as fact. Yet the BBC and producer David Wheeler embraced the stunt, later noting that the prank had succeeded brilliantly and that he had no regrets about it at all. The segment went on to become one of the most celebrated April Fool's pranks in broadcast history, frequently cited as an example of clever media mischief that balanced humor with credibility. The spaghetti harvest endures as a lesson in perception, authority, and human credulity. By combining careful planning, professional presentation, and an ordinary yet impossible premise, the prank captivated millions, leaving a lasting impression of how easily the seemingly factual can become fantastical. For one April morning in 1957, millions believed that spaghetti could, indeed, be harvested from trees, and the laughter that followed secured its place in the annals of media history.